Hey cousins, happy Thursday. I saw this article from Newsweek that I really wanted to dive into because I found it very interesting and very fitting in today's day and age to talk about. So the headline reads, Gen Z is much more supportive of political violence. It is by Martha McHardy. And although the article seems to lean a bit left, I definitely agreed with the majority of the points. Because, it's not even just that the shooters are very often, it seems to be Gen Z, but it's that when you go online after these shootings, majority of the support seems to be coming from Gen Z, and especially if the shooting or the violence has to do with something that is political. So we're going to do a deeper dive into this, and I want to know if you guys have noticed this trend as well. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. Welcome to Respectfully. Okay, so again, this article, it does lean a bit left if you guys go and check it out. We can put a link in the description, but I thought that it was just very interesting. Again, it says Gen Z is much more supportive of political violence. So while we have seen this, we have seen in the last 5 years a huge shift when it comes to culture. I feel like ever since George Floyd, people have been much more prone to violence. We're seeing people be much more comfortable with rioting, looting, crime, and making up excuses for all kind of reasons. Is that like an angelic overlay on George Floyd? Country Wheel. Mr. Rodriguez, I'm going to need you to tell Country Will to be careful with these
if I would have seen this, I certainly would have been like, what gives?
Angelic glow over on George Floyd. That is crazy. Anyway, child, R.I.P. Mr. Floyd. But that being said, ever since then, there has really been this turning point. And I feel like during 2020, so like I, for example, am the very oldest month of Gen Z. I am January 1997. That is the starting date for Gen Z. I was 23 during the whole George Floyd situation. So that being said, majority of Gen Z were either teenagers or very early 20s, which are very formative years to the way that we think. And seeing the violence, seeing it be justified, seeing the crime and the looting and all of that political discourse, I really think that was the starting point for people to become more unhinged. But it has certainly gotten worse ever since then. Because since then, we've seen Trump's assassination attempts, the first one being from someone that's in Gen Z. We've seen the United Healthcare CEO be murdered by someone in Gen Z. We've seen Charlie Kirk be assassinated by someone that's in Gen Z. And they, for what it's worth, I'm gonna be honest, I'll acknowledge they are all Gen Z white men. Not saying that this is a racial or a gender thing, but if we're always going to call out demographics, we got to be honest, okay? Because we're honest about the fact that we see a lot of these, gender pronoun shooters. So let's just call a spade of what we're seeing out here. Now, that's side tangent that I know y'all are going to drag me for, but I clock the T here. We talk color over here. It's not always black people to be blamed for things. But that being said, when we talk about the reasons why this author, what's her name again? Miss McHardy. McHardy is talking about the reasons why Gen Z is more comfortable choosing violence or seem to be more supportive of violence. The first reason I don't really agree with, I think it's actually quite a reach. So she mentions that economic uncertainty threatens young men's sense of masculinity and that it leads to this weird supporting political violence thing and doubles down on the gender roles. And that's part of why I brought up the whole white men thing. I do think that's a reach. I don't think that the reason that we're seeing more violence from Gen Z has anything to do with masculinity, nor do I think it has to do with gender roles. But I do think that the rest of the points that she adds, they definitely are much more, full of substance or substantive. So one of the things that she mentions is essentially online extremism and blaming people and blaming just everyone from both sides. Online extremism is a huge reason why we're seeing violence come from Gen Z and be supported by Gen Z, because whether it's the left or the right, they're always going to blame it on their perspective of the following issues. They're always going to bring up race. They're going to bring up gender. They're going to bring up illegal or legal immigration. They're going to bring up religion, or they're going to bring up gun laws. Okay, so when Charlie Kirk was murdered most recently by someone in Gen Z, and we saw all these different Gen Z people making memes and just the most vile, disgusting posts about it, and social media content about Charlie Kirk's assassination, what were they constantly talking about? They were trying to justify Charlie Kirk's assassination because of his views or their perspective of his views on race, gender, immigration, religion, and gun laws. Those were the things that people were constantly bringing up. up. So yes, online extremism is a huge reason why. We also see the rise of radical Islam. We see the rise of illegal immigrants here, and a lot of people trying to justify it. So every angle that you possibly look at it, a lot of it ties back into the online extremism that comes from both sides. Because it's a great thing to have conversations about those topics, but the second you allow your perspective of those topics to become extreme, you have completely lost the plot. Completely and utterly lost the plot. And let's not do that wide shot again, because my pants are flooding right now, chat. So so I do want to add into that though, as we talk about, especially with Charlie Kirk's assassination, the fact that conversation seems to not be welcome in the way that it was before George Floyd. Pre-George Floyd, we were able to have political discourse, and it didn't feel as emotional or as intolerant or as extreme. And nowadays, the second you try to add discourse or peaceful discourse, it leads to anger and violence. We saw that with Charlie Kirk, who was the pinnacle of democracy. He was the pinnacle of reaching across the aisle in good faith and wanting to have conversation and being willing to admit that he's wrong when there are times where people come up to him and say that he's wrong. I saw trending last week, there was actually a video of a deaf man who was telling him that Charlie's comments about I don't know the formal name, but sign language readers, or interpreters, the sign language, American Sign Language interpreters. Charlie made a comment saying that he didn't think that it was appropriate to have them on screen because it was distracting. This deaf person came and explained to him, which I also didn't know, that American Sign Language is often a first language. A lot of people can't actually read English lips, so they only know American Sign Language. When he explained that to Charlie, Charlie admitted, you know what, you're right on that point, and gave him his 10s. That's what good faith conversation looks like, but that's not what the left wants to see anymore. And honestly, there's some people in the woke right who don't want to see it either. But now we're getting to this point where intellectualism is declining and animalistic behavior is taking over. Because there's many things that separate us from animals, but one of the most key things is our ability to communicate and have intellectual discussions. But as those are becoming more taboo, you're seeing more violent behavior. I've given a shout out a couple times now to Cam Higbee and my friends that are doing the Fearless Tour. This video just got posted, I believe, yesterday. Let's play this clip. Again, trying to have good faith conversation. They start arguing, and this violent thug starts, assaulting him, gets pepper sprayed all up in his nachos. I know that hurt. And then Cam started talking his little mess. And this is the type of stuff that's happening. He's over there trying to have good faith discussion. He's not choosing violence. He's literally in a fold up lawn chair. So the fact that this person thought it was appropriate to assault him is crazy. And my message to Cam, just like I texted him and I said this, Cam, you need to stop being so close to these people. You're not proving anything new by proving that the left chooses violence. And it's not worth it. Anybody that is thinking to do on the ground journalist content like this, I respect that you're doing it. I respect how brave you are for doing it, but it is not worth allowing these people to get that close to you when you know that they choose violence because they choose animalistic behavior while intellectualism is declining. Especially when they're in Gen Z these days. And there's going to be people who will try to justify this black person assaulting him because, it's someone black and you're probably saying things that are racist is what they're going to try to argue. Okay, that's where Gen Z is just completely losing the plot. Other factors that were brought up in this article included economic struggle. So when it comes to economic struggle, there's always this narrative that poverty leads to crime and desperation, which factually, objectively speaking, it does. I have always rejected the premise just on a more subjective level. I know that, obviously the stats show it. It's common sense that in more poverty-stricken neighborhoods, there's going to be more crime because they're more desperate. I've always just hated the mindset of that, though, because no matter how poor you are, that doesn't give you an excuse to go and try to steal or to try to harm people. But unfortunately, desperate people do desperate things. We saw that with Luigi Mangione. Luigi Mangione went and shot the United Healthcare CEO because he thought it was appropriate for all the people who couldn't afford their healthcare bills, or so we've heard, or so it is alleged. And what is with these angelic overlays? We got Facetune on every single person, every single criminal today.
Yeah, this person doesn't have, from what I'm seeing on my end, and it looks like no editing. I can't lie. The first one definitely looked like
Is that just what Luigi Mansion looks like?
It looks like a well-lit shot from a high-quality camera with a solid lens to me.
Dang, I can understand then why they're all folding, because he looks like a model here. Okay, well, he has good face card. He could have maybe went and did modeling, but instead he's going to be in a cold prison cell for the rest of his life, allegedly, if he committed the crime that they're saying that he did. But Luigi Mansion, as we know, he went up, he shot the United Healthcare CEO, allegedly. And if all the different things that are tracing as evidence as to why he allegedly did it, people are trying to justify it. People are fighting up and down saying that he did this because the United Healthcare CEO, a presumably wealthy man, was in a position of power. And while a lot of people couldn't afford their medical bills, he was living a presumably great life. And again, that's disgusting. I understand being angry at healthcare or at the healthcare system. I speak on the healthcare system being fraudulent all the time, but I would never choose violence again against a man who has a wife and kids. But even if he was single and living in his basement, it doesn't justify choosing violence because you don't agree what it is that he has to say. But a lot of people in Gen Z, they don't see it that way because they are taking the mindset of economic struggle justifies crime and desperation. The other thing that's happening, and I think that this is a huge point that tends to be overlooked a lot, and this is a very understated cause for why we see so many people in Gen Z be totally desensitized to violence, but it's the fact that violence is overexposed. You go online and you see the most vile, disgusting acts of heinous hatred so often that it almost just feel like you see someone be brutally murdered and it honestly feels like you're just watching Call of Duty or Grand Theft Auto. That's how it feels. It doesn't feel real to people anymore. You know, I talked extensively about during my debrief of remembering Charlie Kirk, how it really has not sat well with me seeing Charlie murdered in such a way, even just on a, like, beyond a personal level, but on a human level, like, that's extremely unsettling to me. Like, there's just random moments where, like, the imagery of it pops back into my head and it's not something that I've gotten over. And, you know, who else I haven't gotten over and who else I hope, you know, people don't stop saying her name and demanding justice for her is Iryna Zarutska, the Ukrainian refugee that, let us not forget, prior to Charlie's murder, was slaughtered, had her throat slit on a bus. And the video is all over Twitter, and everybody's seen the video, and everybody has seen this woman, this beautiful young woman bleeding out, and it's just another day on Twitter. It's like, yes, obviously, like, this made a big stir because of how horrible it is. But the thing is the more we see these horrible acts of violence, the more we become desensitized to it. And Gen Z, being the generation that has grown up pretty much our entire lives being virtual and digital, we continuously see this. We are chronically online and we are overexposed to horrible acts of violence. The more you see it, the more you become numb to it, unfortunately. That's like a lot of police officers. Like, my best friend's a cop, and he doesn't talk to me about, you know, what he does on his day to day very often, but he was telling me some old story, and he's just like casually telling me the most vile, like, horrible crime scene. And I'm looking at him just like, are you okay? Like, you seem quite numb. And he goes, I often forget that it's not every day that you see a dead body for most people. And that just like put chills all over my body. Like, seeing a deceased person is not something that anybody should just be, you know, accustomed to, unless they're like embalming bodies or like work in that field, obviously. But the fact that you go online and you see this on such a regular basis, it is desensitizing and demoralizing Gen Z. And, you know, after Charlie passed away, there was a reporter, I want to say from USA Today or somewhere, that reached out to me asking if I think that there should be censorship on, you know, those kind of acts of violence. And I told her it's one of those things that's like, I don't even know if I said this on record or not, but I told her, it was like, it's one of those things I find myself really torn by, because obviously it was like in a really sensitive time. I just watched Charlie be murdered and I was not ready to open up my Twitter and see that. But at the same time, it's like, you have to see it. It has to be visible. I think we should limit maybe the platforms that it's on. Like, I don't think that needs to be on YouTube. I don't think that needs to be on YouTube, Instagram, everything. Luckily, we have X. I'm most comfortable personally with it just being on X, and like the other platforms having it against their terms to maybe not have it, not in a censorship way, but just in a way of there's a place to see it when you're ready to see it. If that makes sense to you guys, I just don't think that every single social media platform I go on should I be seeing someone be literally murdered. I think that does more harm for society than good. I do actually think I see the benefit of there being the little warning overlays on certain videos and images when it has to do with actual murder or actual death or violence to that degree. Because again, I should not just open up, well, I would like to not open up my Twitter feed and I just see somebody getting slaughtered no matter who it is. So it's one of those slippery slope things. I am never going to be in favor of censorship, but I can respect a slight warning on something that's going to be that heinous, because I don't think that young people especially should be just opening up their phone and seeing that every single time. It's making Gen Z way more comfortable with violence and way more desensitized to the fact that a life is being lost every time somebody is being murdered. And the last part of it that I wanted to talk about that I thought was a good point that was made in this article was questioning the importance of democracy. A lot of people in Gen Z feel like democracy has completely failed us. We live in a constitutional republic. Some people say that it is a failed system. I really don't think that it is. I think there are failures within the system, but there's never going to be a system that's perfect. But for the people who say that our democracy and the fact that we all have some sort of say in what happens in our country, that has failed us, I think that's a reach. I feel like, yeah, there's downsides of being in America, but where in the world is better? I always have to challenge people with that. Where is the country that is doing better, and why aren't you there if that's the case? Because if you take your mindset there, it's either not going to be accepted or allowed, or people with your mindset are going to go there and ruin it. But a lot of people in Gen Z will get frustrated that they're making $7.25 an hour and rent is $3,000, and everything seems to be like we do feel like we're holding the weight of every prior generation's burdens on our shoulders financially. And I get that. I get the anger. I get the frustration. But violence and tyranny and anarchy, that is not going to bring the solution that you guys want. That is just going to make everything a million times worse and have us living like we're in some kind of third world country with no integrity or moral compass. Okay, so the whole point that she makes throughout it, I think she's correct. I think the author of this article is correct in the fact that questioning the importance of democracy is why there's so much disillusionment with political institutions. But I don't think that anybody in Gen Z should ever take their hatred towards democracy as reason to go and choose violence or to get on the internet and celebrate violence here in America. And that's all I have to say about that. So what do you guys think? Have you guys noticed it? Have you guys noticed that Gen Z is being much more prone to violence or much more accustomed to being comfortable with celebrating violence? Or am I reaching, and is this article reaching? Because statistically speaking, it seems like that seems to be the case. And that's all I have to say. Thank you guys for tuning in for another episode. Respectfully, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. I'll talk to you soon.